The quantum communication array hummed with an intensity that made the deck plates of the Serene Concordance's primary research vessel vibrate. Captain Kralax watched through membrane-filtered eyes as the data burst from the newly discovered human transmission point continued to unravel. They had been tracking this emerging species for decades, another unremarkable civilization on the galactic periphery. Preliminary scans suggested a young species, barely past its first rudimentary steps into space exploration. Nothing could have prepared them for what was about to unfold. Compression algorithms engaged, announced Nexus analyst Vorin, his multiple sensory tendrils dancing across holographic interfaces. Initial data packet decryption commencing in 3, 2, 1. The chamber went silent. The first images were innocuous enough. Early human technological developments, primitive communication networks, basic infrastructure, but then the narrative began to shift, revealing layers of complexity that defied everything the Serene Concordance understood about species development. Vorin's color-shifting skin began to pulse with deep crimson waves of confusion and mounting disbelief. "Captain," he whispered, "these transmission records, they can't be historical documentation. This must be some form of elaborate simulation or psychological test." The holographic displays flickered with scenes of unprecedented brutality. Massive metal machines spewing destructive energy across landscapes. Cities reduced to ash and rubble. Populations decimated by weapons that seemed to defy any rational strategic purpose. And yet, interspersed between these moments of absolute devastation were equally incomprehensible acts of reconstruction, innovation, and breathtaking compassion. War followed by healing. Destruction followed by creation. Cycles of violence punctuated by moments of extraordinary collective achievement. Captain Kralax had overseen first contact protocols for 3 planetary cycles. He had studied emerging civilizations across multiple galactic sectors. But nothing in his extensive training could have prepared him for the raw, unfiltered complexity of human historical records. "Verify the transmission source," he commanded, his voice betraying a rare hint of emotional turbulence. "Run a complete authentication scan. I need to be certain these records are genuine." Vorin's tendrils danced faster, quantum processors working at impossible speeds. Authentication confirms direct transmission from Earth's primary archival network. 0 anomalies detected. These are genuine historical records. The chamber fell into a stunned silence. Humans appeared to be a species that had repeatedly brought themselves to the absolute brink of self-annihilation, only to somehow reconstruct their civilization with even greater complexity and resilience. Global conflicts that should have ended their species became catalysts for unprecedented technological and social transformation. A war that consumed entire continents would be followed by global medical breakthroughs. A conflict that decimated populations would be succeeded by revolutionary communication technologies that connected those same populations in ways never before imagined. "This is impossible," muttered Dr. Linara, the vessel's lead xenoanthropologist, her typically calm demeanor now visibly shaken. No species could survive such continuous cycles of destruction and still maintain cohesive social structures. Captain Kralax knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. These weren't just historical records. This was a blueprint of species-wide evolution that defied every known developmental model in galactic research. The final segment of the transmission was most perplexing. After showing humanity's most violent moments, the record shifted to demonstrate how those very conflicts had been systematically analyzed, understood, and transformed into mechanisms of prevention and collective growth. Transmit preliminary. "Report to Galactic Concordance," Kralax finally said, his voice steady despite the revolutionary implications of what they had discovered. "Classify this as a potentially existential research priority. We are dealing with a species that does not merely survive its own potential for destruction, they weaponize their understanding of it." Vorin's tendrils momentarily froze. "Sir? The implications—" "I know," interrupted the captain. And that's exactly why this must be investigated immediately. Humanity is not just another emerging civilization. They are something else entirely. As the first comprehensive report began its journey through quantum communication channels, no one aboard the Serene Concordance research vessel understood just how profoundly their understanding of galactic development was about to change. The Galactic Concordance assembly chamber was designed for perfect harmony, a vast crystalline space where light refracted through geometric panels, creating an environment of calculated tranquility. Today, that carefully constructed piece shattered like brittle glass. Ambassador Jorak of the Luminarian Collective rose, his prismatic body shifting through shades of angry crimson. The holographic displays behind him churned with human historical records, images of conflict so raw, so visceral, that several delegate representatives had already requested psychological stabilization protocols. These transmissions are either the most sophisticated psychological warfare in galactic history, Jorak's voice resonated through translation matrices, or proof that humanity represents an existential threat to every established civilization. The chamber erupted. Delegates from 100 different star systems began speaking simultaneously, their communication interfaces creating a cacophony of translated outrage. The quantum mediation algorithms struggled to parse the conflicting arguments. Dr. Elin Reese stood at the center of the chamber, seemingly unaffected by the maelstrom of alien diplomacy surrounding her. She was small by most species standards, barely more than 1.7 meters tall, with skin the color of burnished copper and eyes that seemed to hold centuries of understanding. Her research credentials were impeccable. A combined doctorate in xenoanthropology, quantum systems engineering, and comparative conflict resolution from 3 different terrestrial and orbital institutions. But credentials meant little in this moment. Silence, she said. Not shouted, not demanded. Simply spoke. The chamber went quiet. The holographic displays behind her began to shift. Not the chaotic scenes of human conflict, but a carefully curated narrative of transformation. A battlefield morphed into a medical research center. A destroyed city reconstructed itself, showing infrastructure development, educational initiatives, environmental restoration. What you're seeing is violence, Dr. Reese began, her voice calm and precise. We understand as our species' most critical learning mechanism. Ambassador Tornak of the Peaceful Consensus delegation leaned forward, his translucent form flickering, with intense curiosity. Explain. Dr. Reese smiled, not a diplomatic smile but one of genuine intellectual excitement. Every major conflict in human history became a crucible of innovation. The global conflicts of the 20th century didn't just destroy. They catalyzed medical breakthroughs, technological innovations, and fundamental shifts in our understanding of collective human potential. The holographics behind her began displaying rapid sequences. World War II research leading to computer technologies, Cold War tensions driving space exploration, economic conflicts pushing renewable energy developments. We don't glorify our violent past, she continued. We dissect it, we understand it, we transform it. Ambassador Jorak's prismatic body pulsed with skeptical energy. And yet, your historical records show repeated cycles of destruction that would have eliminated any other known civilization. Exactly, Dr. Reese replied. We survived. Not just survived, we evolved. The quantum mediation algorithms began, running rapid analysis, processing human historical data against known galactic developmental models. The results were causing computational anomalies, the first sign that something extraordinary was happening. Senior researcher Kel Veris from the Evolutionary Dynamics Institute spoke next, her voice a blend of academic curiosity and professional challenge. Your species demonstrates statistical improbabilities that challenge fundamental xenobiological understanding. How does a civilization repeatedly bring itself to the brink of self-annihilation and then reconstruct itself with increased complexity? Doctor? Reese's response was immediate. By making our mistakes our most valuable resource. By turning our capacity for destruction into our most sophisticated learning tool. The chamber fell silent. Delegates from peaceful, stagnant civilizations that hadn't meaningfully evolved in millennia found themselves confronting a species that seemed to transform conflict into progress with mathematical precision. Ambassador Zorak's prismatic form flickered, a subtle sign of intellectual capitulation. "You are either the most dangerous species we've encountered," he said slowly, "or the most important teachers in galactic history." Dr. Elin Reese's smile was patient. "Why not both?" As the Galactic Concordance Assembly continued its deliberations, no one noticed the quantum mediation algorithms quietly running advanced predictive models. For the first time in their operational history, the computational systems were generating outcomes that defied their original programming. Humanity had entered the galactic stage, and nothing would remain the same. The psychological evaluation chamber of the Galactic Concordance was a marvel of technological and empathetic engineering. Quantum resonance fields lined the walls, designed to create the most neutral, non-threatening environment possible. Adaptive, neural interfaces could read emotional and cognitive responses with microscopic precision. They had evaluated thousands of emerging civilizations. None had ever broken their systems quite like humanity would. Dr. Lyra Vornash, the Concordance's lead xenopsychological researcher, prepared for what her colleagues were calling the most challenging evaluation in galactic history. Her species, the Empathic Collective, had developed psychological assessment to an art form. They could deconstruct entire civilizational psyches with mathematical precision. Captain Miranda Chen entered the chamber, and everything changed. She was not what the evaluation team expected. A human military historian dressed in a simple graphene-adaptive uniform. Her posture spoke of discipline, but her eyes told a far more complex story. Those eyes had seen conflict, understood it, and learned from it in a way that defied every known psychological model. "Standard evaluation protocols?" Chen asked, her voice neither challenging nor submissive. It was simply present. Dr. Vornash's neural tendrils began their initial assessment. Normally, this process revealed deep-seated traumas, hidden psychological defense mechanisms, collective neuroses. With most species, the evaluation was a straightforward deconstruction of cultural psychopathology. Humanity was different. The first test was simple, a series of holographic scenarios designed to trigger typical stress responses, conflict situations that would normally expose a species' fundamental psychological vulnerabilities. The first scenario: a rapidly escalating territorial dispute between two hypothetical nations, where most species would respond with immediate aggression or complete capitulation. Captain Chen began to analyze, not emotionally, not militarily, but as a complex systems problem. "Interesting," she said, her fingers tracing holographic data points. "This scenario assumes conflict is the default resolution. But look here, the underlying resource scarcity could be resolved through collaborative economic restructuring." Dr. Vornash's neural interfaces began to overheat. The human wasn't just responding to the scenario, she was actively redesigning its fundamental assumptions. The second scenario was more intense, a simulated first contact situation with a technologically superior aggressive species. Typical response protocols would show fight or flight mechanisms, territorial aggression, or complete psychological shutdown. Captain Chen's response was devastating in its complexity. "First, we'd need to understand their communication systems," she began, breaking down the scenario into layers of potential interaction. Aggressive technology doesn't necessarily mean aggressive intent. We'd establish communication protocols, seek common ground, analyze their developmental challenges. The evaluation team exchanged looks of increasing bewilderment. This wasn't a military response. This was a holistic approach to potential conflict that treated violence as a problem to be solved, not a default state of interaction. Dr. Vornash adjusted her neural interfaces. Something was happening that had never occurred in the history of their evaluation systems. The psychological assessment was becoming a two-way process. "Your historical records show repeated cycles of extreme violence," she stated, "more as a challenge than an observation. How does a species survive such continuous trauma?" Captain Chen's laugh was not what the team expected. It was neither bitter nor defensive. It was analytical. "We don't survive despite our trauma," she explained. "We survive by understanding it. Every conflict becomes a case study. Every moment of destruction becomes a learning opportunity." The neural interfaces began to generate warning signals. The human was not just responding to the evaluation, she was actively teaching the evaluators. The final test was the most complex, a scenario designed to expose the deepest, most fundamental psychological breaking points of a species. Typically, this test reduced participants to raw emotional states, exposing core survival mechanisms. Captain Chen treated it like an academic problem. She began to map out the scenario's underlying social, economic, and psychological dynamics. Not as a military strategist, not as a victim, but as a researcher understanding the complex mechanisms of human survival and adaptation. "Our greatest weapon," she said almost as an aside, "is our capacity to understand, not just our successes, but our failures." The evaluation team's collective neural network reached a state of complete cognitive dissonance. They had come to deconstruct humanity's psychological profile. Instead, humanity was deconstructing their entire understanding of species development. As the evaluation concluded, Dr. Vornash realized something profound. They had not evaluated humanity. Humanity had just evaluated them. The technological preservation chamber of the Galactic Concordance was a cathedral of innovation, a massive, spherical structure where the most advanced civilizational development records were stored and analyzed. Dr. Akira Nakamura stood at its center, a holographic projection that seemed both entirely present and somehow ethereal. "Observe," he said, his voice cutting through the chamber's ambient quantum resonance, "how destruction becomes creation." The vast holographic displays began to dance with a narrative that defied every known technological development model in galactic history. Where other species developed technologies through careful, incremental progress, humans seemed to forge breakthrough innovations in the white-hot crucibles of their most challenging moments. The first projection showed World War II, a conflict of unprecedented global destruction. But as the images of devastation flickered, something extraordinary emerged. Radar technologies developed for military tracking, computer systems born from code-breaking efforts, nuclear physics that would transform energy production, medical innovations that would save millions of lives. Senior researcher Colvin of the Technological Progression Institute couldn't contain her scientific excitement. "This is statistically impossible," she muttered, her sensory tendrils tracing the complex technological lineages. Dr. Nakamura's holographic form smiled, a gesture that seemed to contain entire libraries of understanding. "Impossible is just a failure of imagination," he responded. "What you're seeing is not a linear progression, it's a quantum leap of innovation." The displays shifted. Cold War tensions that could have destroyed humanity instead propelled them into space. The space race, initially a conflict of national egos, resulted in communication technologies that would connect the entire planet. Satellite systems developed for military surveillance became tools for environmental monitoring, disaster response, global communication. Every major conflict, Nakamura explained, becomes a catalyst for unexpected innovation. The Concordance, researchers watched in mounting disbelief. A weapon developed for destruction would become a medical imaging technology. Military communication networks would transform into global information systems. Technologies designed to kill would be repurposed. To heal, to connect, to understand. Colvin's computational matrix began to overheat. The human technological progression defied every known developmental algorithm. It was as if humans had turned conflict itself into a bizarre form of evolutionary accelerant. The next projection showed something even more remarkable. Environmental. Destruction had led to breakthrough sustainable technologies. Economic conflicts had driven innovations in resource management. Each moment of potential collapse became an opportunity for radical reimagining. "We don't just survive our challenges," Dr. Nakamura said, his holographic form casting complex shadows across the chamber. "We transform them." A quantum physicist from the Adaptive Technologies Division interrupted. But the energy required to constantly reinvent. The systemic inefficiencies. How is this possible? Dr. Nakamura's response was immediate. Necessity is the most powerful computational engine in the universe. When survival is at stake, innovation becomes inevitable. The displays began to show an accelerating timeline. Each global challenge, climate change, pandemic, economic disruption, became a moment of collective problem-solving. Artificial intelligence, developed not as a military tool, but as a collaborative problem-solving mechanism. Genetic technologies emerged not for weaponization, but for medical breakthroughs. Your species treats technological development like a living organism, Colvin finally said, her voice a mixture of scientific awe and professional challenge. Constantly adapting, constantly transforming. Dr. Nakamura's holographic form began to fade, but his final words resonated through the chamber. We don't create technology. We evolve with it. The technological preservation chamber fell silent. The researchers understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. Humanity wasn't just a technological civilization. They were a species that had weaponized innovation itself. As the final projections faded, the quantum computational systems of the Galactic Concordance began to generate new predictive models. For the first time in their operational history, the future looked nothing like the past. Humanity had entered the galactic stage, and nothing would remain the same. The archival sanctum of the Galactic Concordance was designed to be impenetrable. Quantum-locked data cores, multi-dimensional encryption matrices, and adaptive security protocols that could rewrite themselves faster than any known computational system could breach them. None of these defenses were prepared for Dr. Elena Rodriguez. She arrived with nothing more than a standard data interface and a look that suggested she could deconstruct reality itself if sufficiently motivated. You want to understand humanity? She said to the assembled alien researchers. Then you need to see everything, not just the sanitized version, not the carefully curated narrative, everything. Senior historian Valrin of the Evolutionary Documentation Institute looked skeptical. His species had spent millennia perfecting the art of historical preservation, creating perfect, sterile records that captured events with clinical detachment. Humanity's approach was something else entirely. The first archive opened and the sanctum's quantum adaptive displays began to transform. These weren't just historical records. They were dissections. Brutal, unflinching examinations of humanity's most horrific moments, each documented with a level of psychological and sociological analysis that bordered on obsessive. A global conflict wasn't just a series of battles. It was a comprehensive study of human psychological breaking points. Genocides were documented not just as events but as complex systemic failures of social understanding. Each moment of human brutality was accompanied by exhaustive research into its origins, mechanisms, and, most critically, methods of prevention. We do not hide from our darkness, Dr. Rodriguez explained. We illuminate it. The alien researchers watched in mounting disbelief. Where other civilizations would sanitize or suppress their most traumatic historical moments, humans had turned their worst experiences into the most comprehensive case study of species-wide learning ever conceived. Valrin's computational matrices began to generate warning signals. The data was too complex, too multi-layered to be processed through traditional historical analysis algorithms. A record of colonial oppression wasn't just a chronological account. It was a multi-dimensional exploration of power structures, psychological mechanisms of dehumanization, and the long-term social consequences of systemic violence. Each page of documentation was accompanied by extensive psychological research, sociological analysis, and, most surprisingly, comprehensive strategies for reconciliation and healing. You're documenting methods of preventing future conflicts, one of the alien researchers observed, her voice a mixture of confusion and growing respect. Dr. Rodriguez's smile was razor-sharp. We're doing more than preventing. We're understanding. The archives continued to unfold. Global conflicts that would have permanently fractured other civilizations became moments of collective learning for humans. Economic systems that perpetuated violence were methodically deconstructed. Social structures that enabled systematic oppression were not just identified, but comprehensively reimagined. Each dark chapter of human history was accompanied by extensive documentation of human attempts to understand, to heal, to transform. Most species would try to forget these moments, Valrin said, his computational form flickering with intense analytical energy. You're documenting them with scientific precision. Forgetting is a luxury we cannot afford, Dr. Rodriguez responded. Understanding is our survival mechanism. The most shocking revelations weren't the moments of violence, they were the subsequent moments of collective healing. Detailed psychological rehabilitation programs, comprehensive educational initiatives, designed to prevent the recurrence of systemic violence, economic restructuring that addressed the root causes of conflict. Entire sections of the archives were dedicated to what humans called restorative justice, a concept so complex that the alien translation matrices struggled to fully capture its nuanced meaning. As the final layers of documentation were revealed, the alien researchers understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't just a historical record. It was a living, breathing mechanism of species-wide learning. We are not defined by our worst moments, Dr. Rodriguez said, her voice cutting through the quantum-charged atmosphere of the archival sanctum. We are defined by our capacity to understand them. Valrin's computational core generated a response that surprised even himself. You're not preserving history, he said. You're designing a blueprint for species-wide evolution. Dr. Rodriguez's final smile contained entire universes of understanding. Exactly. As the archives closed, the Galactic Concordance's historical research systems began to generate new predictive models. For the first time in their operational history, the future looked nothing like the past. Humanity had opened its most forbidden archives, and nothing would remain the same. The grand diplomatic sphere of the Galactic Concordance was a marvel of architectural and computational engineering, a perfect geodesic structure where light refracted through quantum adaptive membranes, creating an environment of calculated neutrality. Today, that neutrality would be shattered. Ambassador Sarah Chen stepped into the chamber, and the entire diplomatic ecosystem seemed to hold its breath. She was not what the assembled galactic representatives expected. No elaborate ceremonial dress, no technological augmentations, just a human in a simple graphene adaptive uniform that seemed to absorb and reflect the chamber's complex light patterns. We're not here to convince you of our value, she began, her voice cutting through simultaneous translation matrices with remarkable clarity. We're here to demonstrate how conflict can be transformed into cooperation. The holographic displays behind her began to unfold, not a military presentation but a comprehensive map of human diplomatic evolution. Each conflict became a node of potential understanding. Each moment of potential destruction became a pivot point for collaborative innovation. Ambassador Zorak of the Luminarian Collective, who had previously challenged humanity's right to galactic recognition, leaned forward. The prismatic fluctuations of his crystalline body suggested a mixture of skepticism and growing intrigue. Your historical records suggest a species perpetually on the brink of self-destruction, he challenged. How do you transform that into a model of cooperative potential? Sarah. Chen's response was immediate and devastating in its simplicity. The holographic shifted. A display of global conflicts morphed into intricate networks of international cooperation. Military research became medical innovation. Economic competitions transformed into collaborative problem-solving initiatives. Conflict is information, she explained. Not a problem to be eliminated, but a complex system to be understood. The diplomatic algorithms that typically parsed interstellar communications began to generate warning signals. This wasn't a standard diplomatic presentation. This was a comprehensive redesign of conflict resolution itself, a representative from the peaceful consensus, a civilization that had maintained stagnant diplomatic stability for thousands of years, interrupted. But your own history shows repeated cycles of devastating violence. How can you speak of cooperative potential? Chen's laugh was not dismissive. It was analytical. Because we understand that cooperation is not the absence of conflict, she said. It's the sophisticated management of potential conflict. The holographic displays began to show something unprecedented. Global challenges, climate change, pandemic response, economic instability, were presented not as problems, but as collaborative opportunities. Each potential point of conflict became a mechanism for collective problem-solving. The diplomatic algorithms were generating entirely new predictive models. Humanity wasn't proposing a diplomatic strategy. They were demonstrating an entirely new paradigm of species-level interaction. Ambassador Zorak's crystalline form began to pulse with a complex pattern of colors, the high-level diplomatic equivalent of profound intellectual challenge. You're suggesting that conflict itself can be a productive mechanism of evolution, he said, his translation matrix capturing both challenge and growing respect. Not just suggesting, Chen responded, demonstrating. The presentation continued. Diplomatic initiatives that emerged from potential conflict zones. Economic systems designed to create mutual benefit. Educational exchanges that transformed potential enemies into collaborative partners. The Galactic Concordance had evaluated thousands of emerging civilizations. None had ever presented diplomacy as a dynamic, adaptive system of collective problem-solving. We are not asking to be accepted, Chen said, her final statement cutting through the chamber's complex sensory environment. We are demonstrating a new model of galactic interaction. The diplomatic algorithms reached a state of complete computational recalibration. The predictive models generated by the Concordance's most advanced systems began to shift, not incrementally, but fundamentally. Ambassador Zorak's final response was both a challenge and a recognition. You are either the most dangerous species we've encountered, he said, or the most important teachers in galactic diplomatic history. Sarah Chen's smile contained entire universes of understanding. Why not both? As the diplomatic session concluded, the quantum adaptive membranes of the grand diplomatic sphere began to generate entirely new computational models of interstellar cooperation. Humanity had entered the diplomatic stage, and nothing would remain the same. The Galactic Perspective Recalibration Chamber was not a physical space, but a quantum-networked computational matrix that spanned thousands of star systems. When the first comprehensive human analysis report began to propagate through its systems, the entire network shuddered. Dr. Lyra Vornash, who had initially led the psychological evaluation of humanity, watched as civilizational models that had remained unchanged for millennia began to disintegrate and rebuild themselves in real time. This isn't just a new species entering the galactic stage, she muttered to her research team. This is a fundamental redesign of species-level development. The report was unlike anything in galactic records. Most emerging civilizations were catalogued with clinical detachment, technological capabilities, population demographics, resource potential. Humanity's report was a living, dynamic document that seemed to evolve even as it was being read. The stagnant civilizations were the first to react and the most dramatically. The Kular Consensus, a species that had maintained the same social and technological structure for over 17,000 years, found their entire operational framework collapsing. Their primary research networks began generating unprecedented computational anomalies, where they had seen stability, humans demonstrated adaptability. Where they had maintained rigid social structures, humans showed fluid, dynamic social evolution. Technologies that the Kular had considered fixed were revealed as merely temporary solutions by human standards. Research outposts across multiple star systems began to generate what could only be described as computational excitement. The Evolutionary Dynamics Institute, a multi-species research network that tracked civilizational development, called an emergency conference. The quantum communication channels buzzed with an energy that hadn't been experienced in centuries. They're not just breaking our models, declared Chief Researcher Colvin. They're demonstrating that our models were fundamentally limited. Holographic projections began to show human developmental trajectories. Each moment of potential collapse became a pivot point for innovation. Economic challenges transformed into technological breakthroughs. Social conflicts became mechanisms of collective learning. The most advanced predictive algorithms began to generate entirely new computational models. Humanity wasn't just another emerging civilization. They were a living demonstration of dynamic evolutionary potential. Species that had considered themselves advanced found themselves suddenly re-evaluating everything. The peaceful consensus, a civilization that had achieved interstellar travel millennia ago but had essentially stopped evolving, watched in mounting confusion and growing respect. Their entire societal model was based on avoiding conflict, maintaining stability. Humanity was showing that conflict, when understood correctly, could be the most powerful evolutionary mechanism. Research teams began studying human historical records with an intensity that bordered on obsession. How could a species repeatedly bring itself to the brink of destruction and transform those moments into unprecedented innovation? Dr. Voronash's team discovered something even more remarkable. Humanity's approach wasn't just about survival, it was about continuous, deliberate evolution. Educational systems across multiple star systems began to be redesigned. Diplomatic protocols were rewritten. Technological research models were fundamentally challenged. The quantum perspective matrices, the most advanced computational systems tracking civilizational development, generated a response that caused multiple research networks to temporarily destabilize. Humanity represented a new category of species development, not just a civilization, a dynamic, self-modifying evolutionary system. Ambassador Sarah Chen, in a follow-up communication, delivered the most profound statement. "We are not defined by our past," she said. "We are defined by our capacity to understand it and transform ourselves." The Galactic Concordance's most advanced predictive models began to generate entirely new future scenarios. Scenarios that didn't just project potential developments, but demonstrated multiple potential evolutionary paths. Chief Researcher Colvin's final report was simple yet profound. Humanity is not just entering the galactic stage. They are redesigning what it means to be a spacefaring civilization. As the perspective recalibration concluded, something unprecedented happened. Multiple civilizations began to look at their own historical records with new eyes, their own potential for transformation. The quantum communication networks pulsed with a new energy, a recognition that everything, absolutely everything, was about to change. Humanity had entered the galactic consciousness, and nothing would remain the same. The nexus of evolutionary potential was not a place, but a quantum-entangled state of consciousness that connected the most advanced minds across multiple galactic civilizations. As humanity's full story unfolded, this collective consciousness underwent a transformation that would be remembered for millennia. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of the Galactic Concordance's primary research chamber, the weight of human history resonating through her presence. She was not just a representative. She was a living embodiment of a species that had transformed its most fundamental contradictions into its greatest strength. "We are not defined by our violence," she began, her voice cutting through multiple layers of translation matrices. "We are defined by our capacity to understand it." The assembled representatives from thousands of civilizations watched in collective silence. Holographic displays began to weave a narrative more complex than any single species had ever presented. Humanity's journey was not a linear progression. It was a quantum leap of collective understanding. Every moment of potential destruction had become a moment of potential creation. Wars that could have ended civilization became catalysts for medical breakthroughs. Economic conflicts transformed into collaborative problem-solving mechanisms. Social tensions became opportunities for deeper understanding. Ambassador Zorak, of the Luminarian Collective, who had once challenged humanity's right to galactic recognition, now spoke with a mixture of respect and wonder. "You have done something unprecedented," he said, his crystalline form pulsing with complex emotional resonances. "You have turned your species' greatest weakness into its most profound strength." The holographic displays began to show a comprehensive map of human development. Not a timeline, but a complex network of interconnected moments of challenge and transformation. Each potential point of collapse became a pivot point for innovation. Dr. Rodriguez's presentation was not a defense. It was a comprehensive deconstruction of species-level evolution. Conflict is information, she explained. Not a problem to be eliminated, but a complex system to be understood. Our violence was never our fundamental nature. It was our most critical learning mechanism. The quantum perspective matrices, the most advanced computational systems tracking civilizational development, began to generate entirely new models of understanding. Humanity represented something entirely unprecedented, a species that had weaponized its own capacity for self-reflection. Research teams from multiple star systems had spent years analyzing human historical records. What they discovered was both terrifying and miraculous, a species that had repeatedly brought itself to the brink of destruction and then used those moments as catalysts for unprecedented growth. Climate change became a mechanism for developing sustainable technologies. Economic conflicts transformed into collaborative global initiatives. Technological developments born from military research became tools for global healing. We are not asking to be admired, Dr. Rodriguez continued. We are demonstrating a new model of species-level evolution. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, those that had achieved technological stability millennia ago, found themselves suddenly re-evaluating everything. Humanity was not just another emerging species. They were a living demonstration of dynamic, deliberate evolution. Chief Researcher Colvin's final analysis was both a challenge and a recognition. Humanity represents more than a new civilization, the report concluded. They are a new category of species development. Not just a civilization that survives, but one that deliberately transforms itself, the nexus of evolutionary potential. Began to generate new computational models, scenarios that didn't just project potential futures, but demonstrated multiple paths of collective transformation. Dr. Rodriguez's final statement cut through the complex sensory environment of the research chamber. We are not defined by our past, she said. We are defined by our capacity to understand it and transform ourselves. As the presentation concluded, something unprecedented happened. The quantum communication networks that connected thousands of civilizations began to pulse with a new energy, a recognition that everything, absolutely everything, was about to change. Ambassador Jorok's final assessment captured the collective understanding. You are either the most dangerous species we've encountered, he said, or the most important teachers in galactic history. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's smile contained entire universes of understanding. Why not both? The nexus of evolutionary potential continued to generate new models, new possibilities. Humanity had entered the galactic consciousness, and nothing would remain the same. In the end, their greatest weapon was not technology. It was understanding. The end.